Well, hello there. I'm back. I decided I would do a reading from this book, Hannigan's Hand, The Ghost Woman Talks. This book is actually, it's a ghost novel, but it has elements of horror. And like I've said before in other videos, this book is based on a true story that happened to a neighbor of my family when I was growing up in St. Mary's Bay, Newfoundland. I took that story and I wove a tale of, I guess you could say, horror out of that story, and it's doing very well, and it's very popular, and it's doing great in reviews as well. So I'm not so sure that I ever did a reading from this. I did in launchings and book signings and things like that, but I'm pretty sure I haven't done a reading from it here. And it's renewed interest in it. It's getting a lot of interest, particularly since my other books, my books of true Newfoundland ghost stories, have been on the market, because one of the stories in the true Newfoundland ghost stories, it's the actual original story, the true original story, exactly the way it happened, which was the basis and the genesis for this book. And that story is contained in my first collection of true Newfoundland ghost stories, Haunted Towns, Ghost Stories, Newfoundland and Labrador. So this book is the fictional work stemming from that real happening that I grew up with. And I knew the man. He was a neighbour of my family. He came to the house all the time. So this happened to him in his youth, and like it's explained in the book, or in the back of the book here, it was something that stayed with me all my life. So I decided to do a novel centered around that real happening. The book is, I have to say, this book seemed to write itself, because once I started writing it, it just flowed. I've never had a work flow as easily as this book flowed. It wasn't just the fact that I was writing from something that happened to somebody I knew, and I had all these details that I could conjure up, and, but apart from the fact that it was a true story that it was based on, my mind just flew, and my imagination just flew, and it just seemed to write itself. It turned into this, horror novel. And I don't know how I wrote it, because I read it now. I've read it recently, and I said, my God, how did I write that? I don't know. I just wrote it, and it's something that once I started, I couldn't stop. So it just flowed completely. It centers around, this is the story that, the fictional account of it. It centers around a family that go to a rural community every summer where they have a vacation house. The vacation house is 150 years old, and it's owned by Mr. O'Brien and his family. And the family is his wife, who's from Ontario, and his two daughters, Shelley and Sherry, who are twins. Shelley is a kind of extra intuitive, and she can detect things, and she's really into the ghost stuff, and she can really feel, and she's very sensitive and very perceptive. His wife, Laura, she was born and raised in Ontario, so she didn't get to do any of the things that Mr. O'Brien had grown up with, and his children, he influenced his children on the way he grew up when he was a child around the bay. So she was always fascinated with this Newfoundland way of living, and the fact that, hey, when her husband grew up, there were no electric lights, and this community, they'd walk up on the road, no electric lights, and something like that. And the fact that he lived in a very old house, so a very spooky old house, actually, had a lot of history and so on. So she was very fascinated with this. So anyway, they would go in every summer to this house. Beautiful house, beautiful, rustic, charming house in a place called Aspen Falls in Newfoundland. And this was where they would spend their summers. And Mr. O'Brien, this particular summer, where this story starts, Mr. O'Brien was inviting this Mr. Hannigan, Dan Hannigan, to the house because he wanted the children to meet him. Dan Hannigan was with the guy who had this terrible experience happen to him in his youth, this terrible, horrific experience when he was a very young man. You know, he was a storyteller. He knew all kinds of stories, ghost stories and all kinds of stories. So he wanted the children to meet this Mr. Hannigan. So they were all excited, we're going to meet him and so on. The night that he came to the house, now Mr. Hannigan is the man that had this story inside of him, this real happening. And it so traumatized him that he you know, he wasn't supposed to tell this story of what happened to him. A priest warned him not to dare retell this story or make it known, or terrible things would happen. So he had this blocked in his psyche, and you know, he never ever told it, except that night. They coaxed him to tell the story. He told the story, and as soon as he started telling the story, this terrific storm happened, and it was horrible. And from then on, things get really, really creepy. Really, really creepy. And they get caught up in it, and everything happens and so on. I won't go into what happens to him at the end, because that's a surprise ending. That's quite the surprise ending, actually. So I'll just read from sections of the story. Like I said, it's every second or third page is something horrific and something unexpected happening after Mr. Hannigan told this true story of what happened to him. So this part here, called The Spirit's Revenge, they had gone to a beach party, a bonfire actually. And now this is something else. This was after the storm and everything, and other things happened too. But they were kind of saying, you know, Shelley was kind of thinking, well, maybe just our imagination, or there's other things going on, you know, people playing tricks and so on. So they kind of put it out of their minds. But they went to this bonfire, and she saw this woman walking the beach and with her hands out and everything, and it was. But this Spirit's Revenge is really when the real horror starts happening. They ran past the flakes and stages and banked fire. As they got closer to the banked fire from the bonfire, they stopped still. By the way, what happened to Mr. Hannigan was the result of a shipwreck. What happened to him, what he saw and what happened to him. So the ship figures in these sections here. The ship and its inhabitants, which happened a long time ago. It was a shipwreck, and there were people drowned. As they got closer to the banked fire from the bonfire, they stopped still, staring in terror and shock. Grouped around the banked fire, which they had doused so thoroughly, were about 100 people, men and women, children clutching toys, water dripping from their soaked, old-fashioned clothes, arms outstretched towards the now roaring fire which the boys had banked and put out. The girls screamed. Taylor and Trevor grabbed them and tried to pass through the ghost people, who looked so real, staring at them out of bewildered, desperate and pleading eyes. There was anger too in their empty gaze. Shelley could feel their anger, piercing through to her extra intuitive mind. Anger at being so ruthlessly disembodied from their watery resting place. Anger that their wandering 60-year quest still had not given them peace. Through the ripples of the calm water's edge, they could see more people parading up the pathway, from the depths of their sea-scooped graves, carrying sodden, broken carpet bags and tattered remnants of a life cut short. They were screaming, high-pitched, terrified, desperate screams, while weird laughter emanated from the ghosts by the fire. Behind them was an ancient ship, a battered and wave-lashed schooner of decades ago, its stern open and gaping a huge hole where it had plunged into unseen rocks in a long-ago realm of old Dan Hannigan's youth, tossing men, women and children, screaming futilely into the midnight black, treacherous and unforgiving sea. As Shelley and Shuri and the boys tried to pass the people, they felt themselves being pulled in by a wind like a cyclone. Rocks flew up as the wind got stronger. Driftwood whizzed all across the beach. A million pebbles were zapping them with their eyes, hands, face, hands, feet. Suddenly, Shelley was lifted high into the air, being carried towards the ghost spot of fire. "Help! Pull me back! Pull me back!" she screamed. Her face in the ghostly firelight was white and waxen. She already looked dead, like a corpse. Suddenly, Trevor started yelling, "O'Brien Shelley! O'Brien Shelley!" Shelley was immediately dropped down the plop on the gravel, safe from the wind. "What the?" Taylor started to ask, but there was no time. They had to make their escape. So this goes on, and then Trevor's brother Taylor is taken by the wind and lifted up into the air and all that, and Taylor's gone. He's up in the air. They looked back as they ran, the youth seeming to go out of their legs with fear. Taylor had been drawn to the wind. All the ghosts were looking at him, gleeful, laughing. He was disappearing up into the now black and desolate sky, waving his arms wildly. Then they couldn't see his arms. Soon they couldn't see him at all. He was getting further and further away. So far he seemed like a floating ball of mist. "Come get me, come get me." They could hear a tiny voice, like a wind-up doll, far off in the reaches of the murky clouds. Shelley was sobbing. Taylor was gone forever. Bad, bold, kooky Taylor, who was afraid of nothing and who so often wanted to kill and scream with laughter with at the same time. Her best friend. She didn't like to think of a Taylor with a voice and a mind like a wind-up doll. "We have to get out of here," Shirley was screaming hysterically. So this goes on, and it gets really, really, really horrific. And then finally, there was definitely things happened that Mr. O'Brien, who was very skeptical and really frustrated and really, he didn't accept any of what they were getting on with and everything, and so he decided things got so bad in the house. Finally, things got so bad that it happened to him too. So he talked to his wife and he said, "I think it's about time that we went to see Dan Hannigan," and probably tried to get him to tell the rest of that story, because he only told part of that story. And once he started telling the story, that's when the storm happened and all that, and because it was a curse in his youth and he wasn't supposed to retell the story. So they wanted to get the rest of the story out of him because they figured they might get answers that way. So anyway, they goes up to see him, and he had been laid up for probably a couple of weeks with his arm all swollen and infected and insects coming out of it and all that. And it was the same thing that happened to him years ago when he was a young man, and he saw this creature with no head. And that's how it all started. This was the happening that he kept buried inside of him, and which in fact was the story that I heard about the man with no head and how he had his arm infected and everything. That was the original story, which I weaved into this. So anyways, they went up to see him, and he was pretty, he knew that he was cursed. He knew that, like he said years ago, he was told that no doctor could cure what was wrong with him. So it was the same now, 60 years later. A doctor couldn't cure what was wrong with him. So they went up and they went to see him. The girls were supposed to go, but they sneaked up and hid outside and listened to the whole thing, Shelley and Shirley. So anyway, Mr. and Mrs. O'Brien went up to see him. It was a really rainy old night, same thing, stormy and rainy, and it's like there was just something really weird going on. So they wanted to hear the rest of that story. So I'll read parts of the, the more serious part of the chapter, I guess. All serious, but the action anyway. Old Hannigan's voice came clear. The girls were outside under the window in the rain, listening to him. Old Hannigan's voice came clear, now tired and old. It was so long ago. I was just a lad, like I said. But I remember everything about that night and what happened after. I kept it inside, the secret, for 60 years. I kept my pact with that old priest. Until the other night, the night of the storm and wind, the worst storm I had seen in my lifetime. Since the night of the creature, the thing with no head, it all started to happen then, after I told the beginning of the story. Old Hannigan paused. The wind and rain kept squalling, and through the narrow opening of the window with the stick in it, the girls could see the smoky globe around a struggling wick on the oil lamp on the table, struggling as it tried vainly to stay lit inside the globe, which old Hannigan had neglected to clean, since he had run out of newspapers and his hand was bad. He still liked to live in the old way without electric lights. He continued, his voice becoming gravelly. The morning after I saw the spirit, the man with no head, I was in shock. The cabins had nearly burst apart. Tables and chairs were tumbling everywhere. Dishes were crashing. Bunks flew off from the walls, and worst of all, my hand and arm just kept getting worse. Swollen and red, with a black spider-like trail running right up through it. The foreman sent me home. He said I should go to see the doctor, but he knew no doctor could cure what I had. I knew it too, but I went anyway. I went to the doctor. He gave me medicine, but nothing worked, and the hospital was too far away. I went to see the priest up on the hill, up in his dark, gloomy, freezing house. It was a big house, a lot of big, empty rooms. I was afraid of it, and afraid of the priest too, but my hand kept getting red and inflamed, and the black spider-like thing seemed alive as it wriggled up and down inside my arm, inside the blood vessels. I was going crazy with pain and fear. The priest put me in one of those big, freezing, empty rooms. It was dark, but he made it darker. He told the house servant to leave the room. I was there alone with this formidable, fearsome man in long black robes and holding a wooden cross and sharp implement like a knife wielded above me. Then he closed the heavy drapes and towered over me as I lay shivering on the iron bed. There was only a candle to light the blackness that was everywhere. He looked at my arm and hand. He asked what I'd been doing at the camp. I told him about our work, the timber, and about seeing the man with no head and the cabins going to pieces. He held my arm in his black clawed hand. It's a bad one, he said. You have a bad, bad curse. I started to shake there on the bed. I had something evil, a curse in my arm, my body. I was spirit possessed, devil possessed. The devil was in my body, and I would become the devil. I started to cry and scream, "Get out. Oh, please get it out. Get it out." So as far as I'm going to go. Suffice it to say, there's a lot that happens yet. And like the back of the book says, and the blurb and synopsis and all that, is he just a crusty old man who stepped on a ghost path many years ago? Or is he now a demon to be feared? Kind, gentle old Mr. Dan Hannigan. I wonder. So I'd have to read the book to find out. And here's, I'm going to find it here. Maybe I got it lost now. No, okay. This is a review that came in recently. Actually, it came from London, England. I was kind of pleased with it because, you know, it's an intelligent review, and it mentions a couple of, you know, traditional, classic works of the paranormal that they feel that this book kind of reminded them of. This book is a page turner. After reading the author's collections of true Newfoundland ghost stories, Haunted Towns, Ghost Stories Newfoundland, and his companion volume, Haunted Towns Volume 2, I am hooked. I came across this book and was blown away. Based on a true story from her childhood, which happened to a family friend, she weaves a tale of a house of horrors that is reminiscent of and can even outshine classics such as The Uninvited and the Poltergeist films. This book is a page-turner. In her brilliance, she made sure you will not be prepared for the surprise ending. So, I'm rather pleased with that review for sure, and it did receive a lot of other reviews as well. Anyway, this book is available everywhere, and I hope you get a chance to check it out. It's a great read for all the vacationers coming home from the mainland. With their memories of growing up in rural Newfoundland and all the old houses and so on like that, and you know, it can certainly take you back, that's for sure. When I grew up, I was, and I incorporate all that into this book too. That, you know, I was surrounded by old houses, and across the meadow was my grandmother's house, which was, gosh, 120, 130 years old. Up the meadow was my friend's house, which was like probably around the same age, and there were, you know, all these old charming houses with so much atmosphere. They were so atmospheric, and you know, it was a real inspiration, and I certainly dug into my roots and my growing up years to write this book. I totally enjoyed writing it, and like I said, it wrote itself. So I hope you kind of check it. I hope you check it out, and it's really, you know, all ages from teenagers to 100 really can really enjoy this book. So thank you for tuning in, and have a nice day. It can be picked up anywhere good books are sold, and online, Amazon, Chapters, Barnes and Noble, and all those places. It can be picked up and shipped and sold, and so on. So I hope you check it out, and like I said, thank you so much for tuning in. Bye.